Well, hey, Soundside, and anybody else who might be watching, Pastor Aaron here. I'm going to wade into a bit of a controversy for just a couple of minutes because I think it's finally time to talk about the vaccine. Oh, I'm not going to talk about the science of it. I'm not going to tell you what you need to do, but I've seen enough stuff going online that I think there's enough confusion that I can help. Just give me a few minutes here to talk about what the Bible says about the vaccine and the mark of the beast. That's right. I've seen enough kind of little undercurrents in some of the Christian discussions online to say, you know what, maybe it would be helpful to take just a few minutes and talk about the vaccine and the mark of the beast. And so that's what I'm going to do. Give me a few minutes here. This is not something we can do very, very quickly, but I don't think I have to take a whole lot of your time to do this. So let me go ahead and start by saying, if you are one of those Christians, or you know a Christian who honestly believes that the COVID vaccine is the mark of the beast, let me just say, I can understand why you think that. I can. I really can. The Bible describes the mark of the beast as this thing that if you don't have it, you won't be able to buy or sell. And it gets kind of wrapped up with some government issues, and it looks like it might be forced. And right now, some of the discussion in our country right now revolves around the government possibly forcing people to take the vaccine and companies not allowing you to buy or sell if you don't have the vaccine. Now, some of this isn't exactly true, although there are government agencies. In fact, I think the federal government is forcing its employees to get the vaccine. And there are a lot of private companies that are requiring their employees to get the vaccine. And certainly there's talk about, whether or not you can eat at a particular restaurant if you do or if you don't have the vaccine. So we start getting into this realm of, well, if you don't have this thing, this shot, then you can't buy or sell. And for a lot of Christians, all these alarm bells go off in their head and they think, I've read that before. That's in the Bible. That's the mark of the beast. Well, you might be watching this right now, and if you're still with me 2.5 minutes in, you might be saying, well, what is this mark of the beast? I see Christians talking about it, but what in the world actually is it? Well, let me explain a little bit about what the mark of the beast is. Many Christians believe that the biblical book of Revelation, the last book in our Bible, describes the future end times right before Jesus Christ returns with his kingdom. I am one of those Christians who believes that Revelation does describe the future, although that's not the whole story of Revelation. There's a lot more to it. Our church spent basically most of last year looking at the book of Revelation on Sunday mornings. But the book of Revelation describes a beast. Okay, it describes a beast. It's a grotesque picture of a beast, but this beast represents government. Not necessarily a one world government, but it does represent all the government power of the world. And then eventually this beast that represents governmental power comes to be embodied in a man. Okay? He represents the world's government power. And this man in the Bible, not the book of Revelation actually, but other parts of the Bible, comes to be called Antichrist. Certainly you've heard that term, Antichrist. Okay? Now, Antichrist is, well, he's the beast, okay? In one manner of speaking. But this is where a lot of Christians make a tiny little misstep. Because when they think of Antichrist, they think of things like antifreeze, okay? Antifreeze means it doesn't freeze. Antichrist, a lot of people think it's somebody who is against Christ, all right? He makes war on Christians. He persecutes the church. And that's partially true. But that's not the only meaning of Antichrist. Antichrist doesn't just mean against Christ. It can also mean instead of Christ. And that's actually that's actually closer to the biblical picture of Antichrist. It's not so much against Christ, that is true though, as he is instead of Christ. He is a pretend Christ. That's right, this guy comes on the scene coming as a pretend Christ. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us that he will deceive many who are in the church. That's right, there are going to be many people who today call themselves Christians who will be deceived by this pretend Christ, and they will actually become his followers. So what we have this picture of is we have this picture of this guy who wields political power, wields some religious power. He in fact has some prophets that go around preaching that he is the one that Christians should be loyal to. And not just Christians, but people outside the church too. But he wields this political power, he wields this religious power, and then he wields this economic power, because Revelation 13 tells us that he causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. So here's the mark of the beast. It is this economic power that goes in the right hand or in the forehead that if you don't have it, you can't buy or sell. And it's the mark of this governmental figure who wields political and some kind of religious power. So the question we have to ask is, what is this mark of the beast? What is the mark that these people receive? Now, people have tried for many, many years to identify what the mark of the beast is. There was a time when people thought that the UPC code on the back of virtually everything that you buy, the barcode that gets scanned, many people thought that that was the mark of the beast, that somewhere hidden in that barcode was the number 666. And of course, if you didn't have it, you couldn't buy or sell. People thought that UPC codes were the mark of the beast. In more recent times, people have suggested that RFID chips would be the mark of the beast. These tiny, tiny little microchips, smaller than a grain of rice, that can fit into you and have all of your medical data and all your personal identification. They've suggested that will be the mark of the beast. Although I do find it very, very interesting that you can go to an Amazon store and just wave your bare hand with no RFID chip, wave your bare hand over the scanner, and they already know all that stuff about you. Or at least they can. So RFID chip, interesting theory, but I think modern technology has almost rendered that unnecessary. And of course, today, some people are suggesting that the vaccine might be the mark of the beast. And to all of that, I would say, honestly, this is beside the point. All of this is beside the point, because people who attempt to identify the mark of the beast in some physical mark or some physical item are, let me just say it like this, being too literal. Too literal. They're trying to read too much literalism into the passage. You say, Aaron, don't you take the Bible literally? Yeah, for the most part I do, but taking the Bible literally means taking figures of speech as figures of speech. It means taking symbolism as symbolism. And when you get to the book of Revelation, what do you have? You have a ton of symbolism. So for instance, the beast has 10 horns, 7 heads, part of him looks like a leopard, part of him looks like a bear, and part of him looks like a lion. I have yet to hear anybody arguing that the beast literally looks like that, and yet the same people will tell me that the mark of the beast has to be taken literally. Well, I'm just going to suggest that if you attempt to read the book of Revelation with that level of literalism, you won't be able to get anything coherent at all. The book doesn't stand up to that kind of literalism, and it's not supposed to. Because the book of Revelation is absolutely filled, chock full, with Old Testament references. That's right. To understand the book of Revelation, you really need to be steeped, I mean steeped, in your knowledge of the Old Testament, which basically rules out most American Christians. I mean, if the statistics that I read about American biblical literacy are even remotely accurate, most American Christians have no business attempting to interpret Revelation. That's not to say that the big ideas of Revelation aren't clear. I think even the most immature Christian can read the book of Revelation and profit from it, and I would encourage them to do it. But to start digging in and getting into this hair-splitting and minute types of exegesis without knowing the Old Testament, I don't think you have any business doing that. Or let me say it like this. If you can't explain Ezekiel chapter 9 to me, you have no business attempting to interpret the mark of the beast. You say, what are you talking about, Aaron? Well, let me try to explain to you. You see, in the Bible, what we find the beast doing, at least at this part of Revelation, chapters 12, 13, and 14, is we learn that the beast is a great counterfeiter. That is, he takes what God does and does his own version of it. And in this case, it's all about the mark. You see, we read about the mark of the beast in Revelation 13, and people start looking around trying to find it in the world around us. And what we should have done is we should have just turned a couple pages back and looked at Revelation chapter 7. Because in Revelation chapter 7, what we discover that God in the book of Revelation has already marked all of his people in their foreheads. Now, let me take just a second here, little insider language, okay? If you are a dispensationalist or your theology is dispensational, then you are probably not reading Revelation the same way that I am. Or at least there's going to be a few differences. By the way, if you are a dispensationalist, you likely believe that you're going to be raptured out of here before any of this stuff happens. So you should be the last people to be worried about the vaccine being the mark of the beast, according to your own theology. But even if you're dispensational, I do think that you would agree mostly with what I have to say here. So in Revelation chapter 7, God has marked all of his followers in their foreheads, leaving us to understand in Revelation chapter 13, all the beast is doing is he's creating a counterfeit version of what God has already done. Now, in Revelation chapter 7, remember, Revelation is steeped in the Old Testament. Revelation chapter 7 is an image, a symbol, a picture that is drawn from Ezekiel chapter 9. In Ezekiel chapter 9, God takes the prophet in a vision. He's not actually physically there, but in a vision, God takes the prophet Ezekiel to the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem is about to come under God's judgment for their sin. And God gives Ezekiel this vision of an angel going around the city, finding all the true followers of God and doing what? Oh, look, marking them in their foreheads. Why? So that when the judgment of God falls, God's own people will be protected from it. Likewise in Revelation 7, the judgment of God falls, but God's people are protected from his judgment. They're not specifically protected from persecution, but they are protected from his judgment. So what do we find? We find that in Ezekiel chapter 9, and in Revelation chapter 7, God is marking his people. That is, he is showing us that he knows who belongs to him. He's putting a mark of his ownership on his people. And the beast, that great counterfeiter in Revelation chapter 13, is doing the exact same thing. Just as God has marked his own people, the beast marks his own people. But that's not all there is to this. You do notice in Revelation 13 that the mark of the beast can come into the hand or the forehead. Once again, the beast is creating a counterfeit. This counterfeit, however, comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6 contains what is known as the Shema. It is the most basic confession of faith that God's people could make in the Old Testament. It's found in Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. I want you to listen as I read these verses. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children and shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Okay. Our love for God is to be marked by our adherence to his word. These words I teach my kids, these words I talk about all day long, these words I put on my hand or in between my eyes on my forehead, or I write them on my gate, I write them on the walls of my house. Now, some of this, in fact, all of that could be taken literally. And I'm not suggesting that we don't necessarily take them literally, but when we get to the ministry of Jesus, we find that the Pharisees in Jesus' time took it extremely literally, actually writing scripture on pieces of paper, putting them inside boxes, tying those to their hands, tying them in front of their heads. As far as we know, Jesus didn't take it that literally. You say, so Aaron, what's the point? Are people supposed to be walking around with scripture verses hanging off their wrists and hanging off their foreheads? Well, when's the last time you saw anybody doing that? I mean, if we're going to take it literally, that's what we're supposed to be doing. But I haven't met really anybody except for extraordinarily Orthodox Jews, that would argue that it's meant to be taken that literally. Why? Because it's a symbol. It's an idiom. It's a figure of speech. Tying something to my hand and putting it between my eyes or attaching it to my forehead is a symbol that I believe it, that I trust it, that I adhere to it, that I'm loyal to it, that I have pledged my loyalty, my fealty, my fidelity to God, that I love God, and I show it by this figure of speech here, by attaching it to my hands and attaching it to my forehead and attaching it to my house. Well, when we get to the mark of the beast, we find the same idiom. We find the same figure of speech. The mark of the beast is in their hand, or it's in their forehead. It is a word picture borrowed from Deuteronomy chapter 6. It is a sign, a symbol, a metaphor for loyalty and faith. That's right. In fact, we might say it like this, that the mark of the beast, whatever it actually is a pledge of allegiance made by the beast's followers to him. So if I were to just tie all this together, I would just say that what the Bible teaches about the mark of the beast, the Bible teaches that the mark of the beast is the beast's way of identifying his followers, and it is also his followers' way of identifying with the beast. You say, well, I thought people were going to worship the beast. Yeah, they are, but maybe not in the way that you think of worship. Honestly, I don't know that everybody that takes the mark of the beast is necessarily going to be a devoted worshiper of the beast, so much as someone who goes along with him instead of following Christ. I think it might be more akin to a lot of Germans in the 1930s flying the swastika just to stay out of trouble. In fact, the swastika in the 1930s and 1940s is perhaps a great example of what the mark of the beast might end up looking like. Not literally, but the type of behavior associated with it. It's the beast's way of identifying his followers. It's the followers' way of identifying with the beast, and all of it is a counterfeit to how Christ's followers identify with him and how Christ identifies his followers. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I tend to doubt that it's going to be a tattoo. I kind of doubt that it's even a physical mark. It may have a physical manifestation. It might be some obscene pledge on currency that you have to use, although the way things are going, currency looks like it's going to be obsolete before long anyway. I don't know what the mark of the beast is. I just know what the mark of the beast is supposed to do. It is a sign of some kind that the beast uses to identify his followers, and it's a sign that the beast's followers use to identify with him, and whatever it is, it would involve turning one's back on Jesus. So whether it's a flag, whether it's a pledge, whether it's an actual mark of some kind, it is something that Christ's followers won't do and can't do. So that's the mark of the beast, according to the Bible, as far as I can tell. What does this have to do with the vaccine? As far as I can tell, nothing. You know, I could be wrong about a lot of this stuff, and certainly I have a lot of things to learn. So if you want to continue the discussion, let me know in the comments, and we will find a great place to discuss this. I would love to get into this. Not really interested in debate, but always interested in learning. I hope this helps. I hope this is an encouragement. And if you've been worried about this, I don't think it's something you need to be worried about. Again, not telling you what to do or not do regarding the vaccine. I am just saying if you're worried about its connection to the mark of the beast, I think that that's a worry that you can place in the Lord's hands. If you love Jesus and you're following him, it's not something you need to be worried about.